And share my screen. Let me know if you're able to see my screen.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yes.
So everyone, just a formal welcome to our Salesforce Flows learning series. As you know, this is the first in the part of a 4-part series of learning. We are going every week starting from today for the next 4 weeks, 5:30 p.m. Eastern time. We've got Olivier and William who are our experts who are going to guide us through that journey, who are going to be our flow experts and really help us get there. So thank you all for joining there. So really the biggest thing for us is really the warm support we've got. Folks who asked for this, who shared this session and are joining here. I know all of us have our day lives and we've got lots of things to do, but we are all investing time to come together and learning from each other. So big thank you, big shout out to all of you. All our community groups are successful just because of the community. I mean, you all make what this community is. So just a big thank you. Our speakers for today, and you would have probably heard them, William and Olivier. William is 11x certified. He's a senior consultant at Slalom. He's led various Salesforce implementations across in different industries. And apart from like the core products like sales, service, experience cloud, he's also worked on more specific products like FSL, order management system, and net zero and a non-profit success pack. So he's got a great breadth of experience. Olivier also with Slalom. He's also 11x certified. Interestingly, he spent the first 4 years in manufacturing industry, playing various roles in different consumer goods companies across Canada. And the last 3.5 years or so, he's been in the Salesforce ecosystem, enjoying discovering new features and solving complex problems. Now, personally, I've had a chance to work with both of them, and for me, they are just rock stars and just fantastic folks to be around. So I'm just as excited, or probably more than all of you, just to hear them speak. So huge thank you to William and Olivier for investing your time and really helping us learn. So thank you again. Quick intro about our group leaders. I'm Prashant. You've heard Sudha. Neil unfortunately had a conflict. He was not able to join for today's session, but do join our group in the Trailblazer Community Group's website, as well as our collaboration group. You'll get all the posts there, as well as the recording of the session will be posted in that chatter group. So do join there. Sudha has posted the links on the chat, so you can directly access and join the group. Also want to take a moment to thank the Zoom sponsor host of this event, Slalom. Slalom, as you know, is one of the top consulting firms in the Salesforce space, and they're helping us with the logistics, and the Zoom is supported by them. And quick overview of the agenda. They're all already into the kickoff, so just spending time to get to know each other. And in a few minutes, we'll go through the flow view session, as well as have the Q&A towards the end. Just from a logistics perspective, the session, we will keep all the questions of the session to the end, so that William and Olivia can cover all the different topics and address all the questions together. But in the meantime, if you have questions, please do post them on chat. They will be monitoring the chat, and if one of them can respond during the session, they'll get to it. Otherwise, we will monitor it and get back to you towards the end. Before we get started, just some house rules. Turn on your camera if it's appropriate. Just mute your mics unless you want to speak. And during the session, I would say keep it muted. When you open it up for questions, definitely feel free to unmute and ask your question directly. Interest of time, post your questions on chat. If you're able to answer it on the chat itself during the session, we can do that. But it also allows it to be engaging. So if someone else has worked on a similar topic or has a different perspective on your question, they can also pitch in. So be interactive on chat, ask questions, participate. Of course, be polite and respectful. That's it. Now, with that, I don't want to keep you away from the real reason why we're all here. I will stop sharing and let William and Olivia take the show. So over to you, William and Olivia.
Thanks, Prashant. Olivier, if you want to share your screen.
Yeah, it's coming just here. Okay.
All right. So thanks, Prashant. You set the stage pretty well for us. So if you want to go to the next slide, Olivier.
There, okay.
All right. So just wanted to reiterate a big thank you to all the people who are attending this session. I think it's a pretty exciting session, and we are really thrilled to see the amount of people who registered and the amount of people who showed up. I definitely believe that flow is an interesting topic, so it's great to see so many interest into it. And also wanted to take the time to thank Prashant, Sudha, and all the people who organized this event, because I think this is great for the community. So big thanks to you guys. All right, so Prashant already introduced us, so we can go to the next slide. All right. So before going into the content of today's session, I just wanted to remind the agenda for this learning series. So as you can see, the idea of the series is a 4-part series, as Prashant mentioned. So for the next 4 weeks, every Wednesday at 5:30 p.m. EST time, we'll have a session about an hour to go through different topics on flow. Today, we're in the first session, so we'll talk about flow overview, and we'll do really an introduction on flows. You'll see that today's session, we are going to really more focus on the theory, and it's going to be a bit less practical than the 2 other sessions that we have, record triggered flow and screen flows. But the purpose is really for you to learn the basic of the flow, and it's to be able to set the foundation for all the subsequent sessions. Next week and the week after, we'll go about record triggered flow and screen flows. So no worries if those 2 terms, like you're like, I don't know what they are, I'm unfamiliar with this. This is the purpose of today's session. We'll be able to uncover what those means. And then finally, in 3 weeks from now, we'll have a session on some advanced concept and best practices for flow. So next slide, Olivier, please. All right, thanks. So before going into the session, I just wanted also to take some time to do a couple of reminders on the learning series objective and some general comments. The first thing that we wanted to point out is the audience for which the learning series is intended for. The way we build the series is that the content, we really started from the basic, and we started from the assumption that people had 0 experience with flows. So if you do have some experience with it, or if you are familiar with creating and maintaining flow and you've already done that in the past, maybe this series or some part of the series might not be best suited for you, because you might find some concept redundant or pretty basic. However, in the last session, you'll see we'll cover a bit more advanced and best practices concept that might be relevant. But again, the perspective that we're taking is really we're aiming that for people who are new to flows. The second thing is that flow, on which we wanted to comment, is that flow can be pretty complex and is a broad and deep topic. So we, in that 4-part series, will definitely not cover everything about flows. And we actually don't pretend to know everything about flows, because it's a pretty deep topic. So there might be some questions that you guys will have for which we don't have the answers. We'll be more than happy to search the answer for you. But definitely it's a topic that can be pretty deep. And the third thing, and that's actually ties to what I just mentioned, is that flow, like a lot of the Salesforce feature, it's a never-ending learning journey. There are always stuff that you can learn about on flow, and Salesforce is always enhancing flow and the product. So there are always new things to learn about flow. So really, you always need to keep up to date and learn about flow. And lastly, just enjoy the learning process. As you'll see, flow can be pretty daunting, and it isn't necessarily like an easy tool to learn at first, especially for people who don't have any developer background. But at the same time, like, it's a really great opportunity to learn new things, challenge yourself, and discover new concepts. All right, so Prashant already described the agenda for today, and as he pointed out, ideally we keep the question for the end of the session to make sure that we keep the flow and we respect the time allocated to each section. All right, so without further ado, let's get into it. So to start with, what is Salesforce Flow? You probably have heard about Flow many times and you've seen it in blog or LinkedIn. Flows is really a term that we see often when we talk about Salesforce. But really, what does it do and what is it used for? So if we put it simply, Salesforce Flow is a tool that allows to extend your Salesforce org and the solution and build complex business solution and automation using clicks, not code. Clicks, not code, it's probably a statement that you've heard many times from Salesforce, but with Flow, this is really taking this to another level because it's a much more powerful tool compared to any of the other automation tool or declarative solution that Salesforce ever had for building automation. So the idea behind Flow is really to try to empower as much as possible the admin to address complex business requirements. And the idea is really to try to bridge the gap that there was before between an admin and a developer. Because ideally, we want the admin to be able to do as much as possible without the need to rely on developer. Not only Flow allows you to build a complex and performant automation, but you'll see that it also gives you access to additional feature that really lead to a lot of endless use case with the different type of flow that we can have. So there's a lot that can be achieved and accomplished with Flow. And finally, for those who are Salesforce OGs, Salesforce Flow was previously known as Visual Flow. So if at some point you heard Visual Flow and for some reason you were stuck in time and you're like, where is Visual Flow? Now this is Salesforce Flow. A couple of enhancements have been done. You'll see that it's a much better and cleaner UI, but this is technically the same tool behind it. So now that we've introduced Flow and what it is, why should admin care about Salesforce Flows? There's a couple of reasons, actually. The first one, as I pointed out previously, is that Flows offer a lot more flexibility compared to other tools, such as workflow rules and process builder, where, as we know, there were some limitations for which at some point we were like, I have to do custom, I have to rely on developers. Secondly, and once you know Flow and you're trained on it, I personally find that it's much easier to maintain than workflow rule and process builder because it's definitely more visual. It has some color coding and it's easier to see at a glance what is the automation that you're doing, what are the different steps and actions that are being taken. The third reason is that when we talk about automation for record, and especially with Flow, the Flow solution is definitely more performant than any other solution that Salesforce is doing with declarative configuration, especially when we talk about high volume, about automation for high volume. And also it provides a lot more control over the automation that you have in your org or on a specific object. And we'll see that in more details in the subsequent sessions. Next one, number 4, and we already covered that in the previous slide, but new capabilities and enhancements are provided with each release. Flow is the tool of choice that Salesforce is pushing to build any automation. And so Flow benefits a lot from each release with a lot of enhancement and new features that are being added. So if you want to be able to benefit from those enhancements, you need to use Flow and start leveraging Flows. And finally, last but definitely not least, and this might be actually one of the biggest reasons why admins should care, and I hope this isn't a surprise for anyone, but Salesforce is planning on retiring the other automation tools that they had, meaning workflow rules and process builders. And so what we have on the screen here is an approximate timeline about the retirement and the different milestones. Just want to say here that this is taken from a screenshot from a Salesforce presentation. I think they presented that in one of their sessions. All the dates that you see here are estimated dates. There's nothing official really, but that gives you an idea of what are the milestones and when they're officially trying to go away and decommission workflow rule and process builder. So as you see, we're talking about 2025. You still have time. But it's a good thing that you guys start learning and be proactive about learning Flow because at some point you won't have no choice. So Well, all of that says, I hope that you guys are convinced that being there today is a great thing to start your flow learning journey, because again, at some point you won't have any choice. So now I'll hand it over to Olivier so that he can walk you through the overview of flow types.
Yes, in this section, I'll go over like all the flow types you can create in an org. To create a flow, you always need to select a type, and each type of flows have a purpose. So you'll be able to see what is the purpose of a screen flow, a record trigger flow, a platform events trigger flow, an auto launch flow, and a scheduled trigger flow. After we go over all these types, I'll go in our sandbox and I'll show you a bit of like what a screen flow can do and how do we use a record trigger flow also to affect and update an opportunity. Those are, I would say, the two main flow that we can use in an org. So it will be a good example to see them in action. Our first type is the record trigger flow. Record trigger flows are probably the most used flow in systems. And they pretty much update or create record whenever we perform an action in the org. This also will be the flow that will replace the process builder and the workflow rules. An example of a use case for a record trigger flow would be that, for example, every opportunity created, if it's over $5,000, I want to notify my manager. Every time this will happen, the flow will allow us to send a custom notification to our manager, an email template, anything like this. Then there's the screen flow. Screen flows are created mainly to interact with users, guide them through specific scenarios, and update different records in Salesforce. This can be used in an experience website, for example, or even now that Salesforce acquired Slack, they even have created templates and different ways to integrate screen flows with Slack. So lots of endless possibility with screen flows, and it facilitates a lot the job of any user that will interact with those automation. A quick use case for this would be, for example, if you're a customer service rep and you're on a sales call, we can create a screen flow that will guide the rep doing his discussion with the customer. And after each step, it will allow the user to collect information and then update a case or create an opportunity or anything like this. So it allows pretty much, it saves lots of time to any user that use those type of automation. Then we can go over the platform trigger flow. This one is more of an advanced flow. We will not spend that much time on this flow during our presentation, but lots of time they are used in integration between systems. Platform events are something that Salesforce pushes a lot to facilitate an integration. And a quick use case to help us understand how it will be useful is that, for example, whenever I have an order created in Salesforce and it's ready to be invoiced, for example, I can have Salesforce create a platform event that will notify the payment processor to tell us and process the payment and tell us whenever it be processed and approved. And whenever it's approved, it will send the platform event. The platform event will be catched by Salesforce, and Salesforce will be able to update the invoice with the right information, for example. We also have the scheduled trigger flow. This one is also more of an advanced flow, and it's used to, let's say you want to program a flow to start at a specific time and then perform an action on a series of records. For example, let's say every night I want to update some invoice status so they get processed properly by my payment processor, for example. This could be a great use case for a scheduled trigger flow. Finally, we have the auto launch flow. This one was, I would say, the first and the original flow Salesforce flow type Salesforce created. In the past, there was no trigger to it, and it was acting a bit almost like a record trigger flow, but we were triggering it either with Apex or by a process builder, for example. Now it would be more used for to be executed as a subflow. For example, let's say the use case that we added there is that, let's say, whenever I create an order, I need to update my shipping preferences on them. And the flow that update my shipping preferences can be used in many other scenarios. So I would create a flow to be triggered whenever I create an order, and I will call my auto launch flow as a subflow to reuse the shipping preferences flow and have a lighter visual experience. So this covers pretty much all the flow type that we can create with Salesforce. And then I will jump in our sandbox to show you a screen flow and a record trigger flow, so you can have an idea of what it's doing. So as you can see here, I am in demo org, and I'm in the home page. As you can see here, I got a screen flow that will be displayed to everyone in the org. Whenever they connect, they land on their own page and they'll see this screen flow here. As you can see, we have a description here that tells us a bit what the flow is doing. And we have a toggle button here that allows us to say, okay, do I want to create a new account or do I want to select an existing account? So as you can see here, if I toggle the button, my text field become a record field, a lookup field, sorry. And on this lookup field, I can select any account really previously created in my system. For example, I'll just create an account here. So I'll go slalom test, and then I'll click next. And then I'll be able to create contacts linked to this account. So I'll create one contact. And then the system, the screen flow will tell me, do I want to create more contact? Because usually there's plenty of contact to an account. There can be one, whatever you want. On this one, I'll just click yes and next. So it will bring me back to my other place, and I'll create H here. And the two contacts were the only contact linked to this account. So I can click next, and it will bring me back to the initial screen here. Then we can go see if it worked properly for us. As you remember, we have slalom test. That's the account we created. Is it? And we can see the two contacts created here. One fun thing with screen flow is also we can control what we display to the users. For example, to show you a bit how we can kind of control everything we display with the screen flow, like the screen, depending on the object it's on. We have the same flow, but since it's already on an account, we'll be able to reuse the account property, and we'll be able to skip the first step. So right now with this account, I can create new contact however I want. So let's say I go there and I create Andrea H, and it will add it to this account. So that's I would say a brief overview of what you can do with a screen flow. To make sure you want to come back for the next session. And then I'll go show you a bit of what a record trigger flow would do with our opportunity, for example. On this one, we have a record trigger flow that will update any account that have a close one opportunity to VIP if it's over $250,000. So I'll pick an opportunity here. And I'll move it to close one, and then we'll go check on the account. Here, I'll select the stage. I'll move it to close one here. And I'll be able to see my
Olivier,
account.
sorry to interrupt. Is it, could you zoom in a little bit? I think some of us are having a little bit of a problem.
Okay.
If it's possible,
Good.
yeah.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, thank you.
I'll wait for it. Sure, and you can see, do you guys see a bit better here? Like if I zoom in a bit more.
This is perfect. I mean, this is perfect for me. If anyone else is having any issues, maybe quickly unmute and let us know or put on chat. Looks to be good.
Okay,
Thank you.
you can see here that this account is now checked as a VIP account, so it will help my sales manager, for example, to report on my account. And you can see that we also automatically create a task, and the task contains like information from the opportunity we just closed. For example, it was closed, the value, and everything like this. So this way, as a sales rep, I know how to, I know that I have to follow up and make sure that my VIP account are working great, are happy to do business with us. And this, I would say, conclude the flow type overview. On this, I'll pass, I'll let it go for William on the flow builder overview, and I'll let him share his screen.
Sure. So one sec. Screen 2 and share. Can you guys let me know if you're able to see the PowerPoint?
Yes, we can. Thanks for that.
All right, cool. So before going, so we're going to talk about Navigate Flow Builder. But before doing that, let's talk about how a flow is made in the backend and really what is the anatomy of a flow, right? So any flow, no matter their complexity, it will always be made of three main components or three building blocks. So the first one is elements. An element is basically an action that the flow can execute, such as like reading or writing Salesforce data, displaying information and collecting data, as we've seen on the example that Olivier did with the screen flow, can be executing business logic or manipulating data. So that is what an element is, and Olivier will cover in a bit in more details what an element is and what are the different types of elements that we have. The second building block is connectors. Connectors, they basically determine the available path that a flow can take at runtime. So they're basically used to connect elements to each other to say, from this element, I'm going to go to the next one and the next one. You have different types of connectors. To keep it simple, we won't go over the different types. Maybe in the advanced session, we would show you like different types. But to keep it simple, we're going to just show you the main type of connector. And finally, the last building block is resources. Not going to go too much into the details of that, but resource represent a value that you can reference throughout the flow. And I think we'll illustrate that with some examples later in this session and also in the subsequent sessions as well. So if I go to the next slide, now we can talk about Flow Builder. So basically, Flow Builder is the name of the tool where you create and you build your flows. So this is where you can like get crazy and build complex flow, and this is basically where the magic happens. It can be accessed under the setup, process automation, flows, and then you just click new flows. And actually, we have a demo right there just to explore together the flow builder. So you guys can still see my screen just to be sure. Yeah. Okay, cool. So to go to the flow builder, you just need, once again, in the setup to type flow, and then here you have the flow option. So if we look at it here, I'm not even in the flow builder yet, but just wanted to point out a couple of things here. Here you can see the list of all flows that you have within your org. So you can see that we created a bunch of flow for the learning series here. You can see in that list view, the type.
Sorry to interrupt. Could you also zoom in your screen a little bit?
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's true. I have a big screen at the office. Is that better?
Yeah, this is perfect. Yeah, thank you.
All right, cool. Yeah. So what I was saying is this is the list of flows. You have some information, the type of flows, so screen flows, auto launch flows, as Olivier just pointed out. You can see if the flow is active or not. If you guys are familiar with Process Builder, you know that a Process Builder can be activated or you can deactivate. That's the same concept for a flow. As long as you don't activate your flow, it's not accessible. It cannot be used really. And another thing that I wanted to point out is similar to Process Builder, Flow can have versions. And so, for example, if I click here and click View Details and Versions, you would be able to see how many versions you have for the flow, which one is active, and you would be able to go back to a previous version of the flow to see what is the updates that we've done, and you can eventually reactivate a previous version of the flow. Just wanted to show you that. Now, let me go into one of our flow, and we should land into the flow builder. So what you see here is the flow builder. There are three main sections in the flow builder. What we have at the top here is the button bar. This is basically where you can view and take different actions on your flow. Then what you have here, that whole section is called the canvas. This is where you build your flow. This is where you add all the building blocks that I was referring to earlier. And this is where you're going to connect them together with this connector here. And finally, what we have here under that left section is called the toolbox. This is where you can have a view of all the building blocks of your flows, such as the resources that we can see here and the elements. And this is also when you can create new resources, as you can see here. So let's take a closer look at each of the items. If we start with the button bar, you have a couple of things here. The first one is select element. So select element just basically allows you to select different elements on your canvas here and allows you to copy them into your clipboard so that eventually you can paste them to save time instead of having to recreate some of those elements. What you have here, do and undo, similar to what we're used to in like PowerPoint or Word, just undo whatever you have done before or redo. Then that gear icon is basically property. This is where you can view some information on your flow, and this is also where you can set some advanced properties. And I think we'll go into some of them in the last session of the series. I'm going to skip for now that auto layout, and I'm going to get back to it in a sec. Then what you have here is just a display message about what is the version of your flow. And then if you have some error message on your flow while you're trying to save them, some warning, you would see them here under that message here. Then you have a set of buttons here. So run, debug, that allows you to basically run your flow and test it as you're building it. Then you have the deactivate to deactivate your flow, so pretty straightforward. And then you have the save as. So similar to a process builder, you can save your flow as a new version of the current flow, or you can save it as a brand new flow if you want to clone it for some reason. So that would be it for now for the button bar. Now, if we look at the canvas, on the canvas, so this is basically where you can add your elements. So to add an element, you simply need to click on the plus button, and then you'll be able to select among a list of elements. Again, Olivier will go in a sec on each of those. You can also click on an existing element, and by doing that, you can either copy the existing element. If you want to paste it somewhere by clicking here, then you would see the paste copied elements. Or you can also click on it and either edit the element to, for example, add fields to the screen, or you can just simply delete it. So this is for the canvas, and something additional here on the canvas, you can zoom out, you can zoom in, and you can also, actually not in this view, but there's another way to select all the elements. And then finally on the toolbox, so this is where, as I was pointing out, you can find all of your resources and your elements. So you can either search for it or you can just find them here. You can view where an element is used by clicking on Find on Canvas. So this is pretty useful if you have a pretty big flow with a lot of elements and you want to know where your elements is. You just have to click on that magnifying glass, and the screen, the canvas, is going to highlight the elements to show you where it is on the flow and where is it referenced. Same thing, if you click here on that details, you would be able to access the same edit screen that if you are double clicking here. And also something pretty interesting is you can see where that component is used elsewhere in the flow. So you can see here that my get records is used in that update contact, and this update contact is basically referring to that get contact. So that's a good way to see also the reference and the link that you have between components or between elements. And finally, just going back to that layout thing here. So basically, this is the flow layout, and you have two options in the flow layouts. This basically drives how the flow is displayed on the layout on the canvas. So you have auto layout or freeform. Auto layout is going to be the option that you have by default when you're creating a new flow. And basically what it does is that it positions automatically the elements on the canvas for you. Whereas if you go with the freeform option, you can define the position of its elements, and you can basically position them wherever you want. In addition of that, if you switch from one layout to another, you'll notice that there's also additional options that are available in some options and not. So for example, you look at the toolbox here, this is not the same where I'm in freeform versus when I'm in auto layout. If I go back here to auto layout, you can see that I don't have the elements. And one of the reasons for that is that in the canvas and freeform, you cannot see the plus sign. So the way to add elements using the freeform is just you need to drag and drop that, and it's going to do the same thing. Similarly, you don't have, for example, the select elements that we had on the previous form layout. So that's just minor differences, but my personal recommendation would be to stick with the auto layout option because I found it much simpler and easier to position your elements within the flow. And also, I'm pretty sure that at some point, Salesforce is going to remove the freeform layout. That was the first option that came out. And then they introduced the auto layout. But I'm pretty sure at some point, they're going to remove the freeform because I don't see the point of keeping two. And auto layout is much more convenient. So that will be it for navigating the flow builder. So now I can go back to our presentation. Let me just go back here. Let me go to the next slide. All right, so you guys can see the slide? Cool. So before going into flow elements and handing it over to Olivier, there are some important flow terminology to understand. The first one is variable. If you guys are familiar with development, you probably know what a variable is, but for people that don't have any developer background, it's going to be a new concept. So a variable, basically put simply, is a placeholder that is used when a value can change based on certain conditions. So it's similar to when we were doing algebra at school and we had, for example, the x variable, and it could take on multiple values. So a variable, it basically acts as a container which can hold a piece of information. The value within the container can change at any time. A variable must be of a specific type, and a variable needs to have a name and it has a value. Name and value are two different things. So to illustrate that, we have two examples on the right here with two different variables. So the first one is variable box1, and the second one is box2. They are of the same type. So the type of variable or the type of record that can go in it, or the value, is Salesforce character. What that means is that in that box, you can only have Salesforce character. If you would try to put in that variable, let's say a Disney characters or a Marvel characters, it wouldn't work because that's not the correct type. So you need to put Salesforce character. And as you can see, we have two different variables and they each have a different value. Like they have cloudy for box 1 and box 2 is astro. And at any point, it could change. So in box 2, we could say bye-bye astro, and it could be Cody that comes in. Because it's a variable, the value can change. If we go to the next slide, this is just to know what are the different types of variable that we have within a flow. Just to do the parallel with the flow, you have different type of variable, and you can have text, number, record. So I'll let you explore through that. I would say one of the most important one is record, because record is basically you're allowed to say this is the container for any record, such as a contact record, an opportunity record. And when you define a record variable, you have another question that is asked, or another property that needs to be set is, okay, what type of object are we talking about? You want to store a record? You want to store a record of what? Opportunity, contact, quote, whatever. So that was for variable. Now to build on top of that, what is a collection? So a collection is basically a different type of variable that can store multiple items. So within a flow, a collection variable allows you to store multiple values of the same data type or records of the same object. So again, we have two examples to illustrate that here. The first one, to continue on the previous example, we have a collection and the name is big box. So this collection type, the type of variable is still Salesforce character, and the variable values is multiple Salesforce characters, because here it's a collection. We can have multiple values. So we have Astro, Cloudy, Cody, Hootie. And it's not because it's a collection that you have to have multiple values. A collection could be just one value. So in that big box, we could remove all the characters and we could just have one character. But because it's a collection, you can have more than one. And so the second example, it's something closer to what we have when you're working within a flow. It's another collection. So it's universal container contacts, the famous universal containers that you guys know. And the type of variable is record. And more specifically, this is the contact, a contact type of object. And so the variable values that you have here would be different contacts, not only the first name, last name, but it would be the whole contact record. And you could explore and leverage any of the fields of the contact. Here, what I'm saying on variable values is just the name, but eventually, if you have a contact record, you could explore like the title, the address, anything related to the contact. So I hope this was clear. We'll get the chance to go into more details in the subsequent session and see it in action. But this was just to introduce and set the stage also for the elements overview. So now over to you, Olivier.
Yes, so I'll go over all the flows elements that are available in a flow. They are, I would say, categorized in three different group. The first one are interactive. So for example, that's where you'll find the screen flow. Sorry, the screen of the screen flow that you'll see there, for example. Then there is a logic category, where it's more like if you see any assignment or any decision in the flow. And finally, you have the data category, where you'll be manipulating your data. So that's where you'll create new records, update new records, or even like create or even get records get information from any records. On to the next slide. We have the logic category. The logic category here, I would say, has the more complex element. The first one, fairly simple, the screens. The screen, again, that's where you input information or collect information in your flow. You then have the actions. This one is, I would say, the more advanced element, where you can perform action with, let's say, Apex or any quick action that are available in your system. So you can also post to chatter or even send email. That's also where you'll submit for approval. But that, I would say, the most flexible, but the most complex to use element. And then there's a subflow. The subflow, as we speak with the auto launch, that's how you take a part of your flow and you use an auto launch flow to, I would say, reduce the amount of bugs that you display in the system. So that's a black box that will call an auto launch flow to help you update or create or modify records in your org. Onto the logic element. In the logic element, you have, that's your yellow boxes. You have first the assignment. That's where you can give value to records. You can also, even with assignment, count records in a collection. That's a bit of an advanced feature. We'll show you a bit more later in the future series. Then you get the decision. That's where that's your kind of your if in a flow. That's where you can create a path and say, if my value is greater than that, do this. If it's smaller, do that, for example. The loop, that's the object that allows us to iterate over a collection of records. So perform actions over a collection of records. You have the collection sort and the collection filter. Those two are, I would say, the newest addition to the flow builder. The collection sort allows us to reorder collection by ascending or descending value. And the collection filter will allow you to keep an original collection, but then create a new collection with filtered records. So let's say I have a collection of all the opportunities in my org, I want to keep only the close one opportunity, I can use a collection filter to have a second collection created quickly with just one element. Then we have our last one. So the data category, that's where you'll see the create records. So create Salesforce record, any object you want to create with value from your flow. You have your update records. That's where you perform an update and you commit an update to a record. So self-explanatory. You have the get record. That's where you'll, from your flow input, get records, get information on a specific record, or create a collection with some records from your flow. You have the delete record. That's where you'll delete your records. Let's say you pass an ID to a flow, you want to delete the records. And you also have a new element type or box now called rollback records. That's where you can, before the end of the flow, roll back a change you made, for example. So if it's used a lot in error handling, for example. So if you do an update, but the update failed, you can roll back everything that was done previously, for example. That's a new addition that was well needed in the flow. And then now that we have an overview of like the different element available for us, I'll go in our test org and we'll go over the different element and what it looks like when you create one and you modify anything, like whenever you create any of those records, what it looks like and how to use those different boxes. So I am now in my demo screen flow here, my demo org, and we'll look into what it looks like for the, I would say the main element. Our first one would be here, our assignment. So that's where our flow starts. And on this flow, we look at our object and we look at, okay, we take this path if there is more than one, and this path if there is only one account. So we just go there and we'll see that in my flow here, I can see that if I get more than one, so my collection is greater than one, I'll take this path. And if it's equal to one, I'll take the other path. There's always a default outcome in those decision element. You can rename them however you want. So for example, here I can rename it default or anything like this. It's easily renameable, but it allows you to pretty much rename your path, and it illustrates very well what the flow will be doing if we need to, depending on the value you have in your flow. Here, quickly, if you have more than one, we'll get records. We'll get some records here. And as you can see here, we can name the record, the box. And then we need to select which object we want to get information from. For us, it was our contact. And here, whenever we never want to get all the contact in order, for example, so we'll have to put filter condition. Here we have and or custom logic. So depending on the criteria we put in, it will allow us to get only the contact we want. So for example, here, I just add one condition. So I want to get all the contact related to the account ID that I use to start my flow from. If I want to add another condition, for example, I can select any other field on the contact to filter out even more my contacts. If I have a custom logic, let's say here, I can manually create my conditions to sort my the account I get information from easier. We then have the sort collection here. In this place, that's where you can sort descending or ascending, and you can sort by field. So you pretty much select, I want to sort all my contact by name or by creation date, for example. you can use a field there and say ascending or descending. So that's very helpful when you want to do specific operations on collection. And again, here I got the choice, do I want one record or all the records? And you have here how to store record data. That's where you can say, okay, I want to get all the field from my object. I want to get only specific fields, so you can select all the field there. You always need to get the ID, but you can be a bit more picky and say, I want to just get the birth date of my contacts, for example, and its ID. And if you want, it was how it was working. I would say that how the flow were working back in the day when they were created. Instead of creating a collection variable for you, you need to manually create a collection variable, and you can specify whichever value you're collecting from it. We'll just keep it here as store all field, but you have lots of flexibility with the get record here. So this is the second element. Then we get our assignment. With the assignment, that's how we, I would say, assign value to variable, but we have also specific action here. For example, here we just counted any contact in a collection. But the main use case of using an assignment would be to give a value to a variable. So let's say I want to get my account as active. I can have equal, and then I can input true, for example. That's where you'll do this. And you can also add a record to a collection, but this is a bit more advanced. We'll look at this probably in the record trigger flow. Then we got our screen here where we can display records. So for this quick demo, on the screen flow, we got different field you can display, or different type of object you can display. And then for the demo here, we just had like the account. We can display the ID, the name, the number, any value we get from the flow, we will be able to display it from there. And as you can see here, we can input anything we want in there. And finally, we got our update record here, where we always give a name. We can either use a collection with an ID, so it will tell us whichever field and ID we want to update, or we can go a bit like we did for the get record, where we'll specify an object, specify the condition on what we want to update, and then the field in the object that we want to update and their value. So for example, like here, I'll go there and I'll say, I can say anything here and specify any filter condition to update whichever I want. So this is an overview of what the flow element would look like and can be used. And this is also the conclusion of our flow series session 1.
Yeah, thanks, Olivier. And I saw a couple of questions on the chat. Just to reassure everyone, the idea for us with that last demo was really to try to show in an interactive way what elements are and what goes into an element, but not necessarily to go into how we create a flow. That is the purpose of the following sessions that we have. So next week and the week after, we'll really go into details on how we start really from scratch. And if we're doing a record trigger flow, how do we even start from the contact trigger and things like that. So rest assured that we'll go into more details in the next sessions for this. So I guess now it's time for the questions. So I think we've answered all the questions that were in the chat, but if not, feel free to come off mute and ask your questions.
There is one question from Ravi. What about all other required fields within the accounts and contacts? Do we need to include them in the screen flow?
Yeah, so and that's a good point. Whenever you're creating a record, you need to make sure that all the fields that are mandatory are included and are populated, because if not, your flow is going to fail. I don't think you're going to have any message on the flow saying you have not linked or mapped a required field. But if you try to run your flow, it's going to fail because you're going to have an error saying mandatory field is not populated or something like that.
And it will show you in the next session how to use the debug log. And the debug log will tell you it failed and you're missing those 2 required fields, for example.
This is Aisha. I do have a question. I just thought I should ask, just jump in. I hope that's okay.
Yes, sure.
Yeah. So the question is a general question. You guys are the experts in Flow and being consulting in Salesforce for longest time. I would like to know what is your suggestion in terms of prepping for flows. How should a person prepare for flows that they are very comfortable using it moving forward in their career?
So you mean how to prepare, like in learning flows, on how to build
Learning, how to become expert, you know, how do you start? Like where would you start? What would you suggest?
Well, I think being there today is a good step. Like being there today, try to attend as much as possible of like sessions, try to search for information. There are some great resources available online. So not only the session that we're doing, but like there are a lot of useful blog. What we could try to do, I think, is also try to share some useful resources, useful links. If you're familiar with Trailhead, there are some really good Trailhead as well on flows. So that would definitely be the first step. And then I would say practice and have experience with it. Like if you don't have any experience with it, like in your job, try to build mini projects, try to define scenarios that are close to what you could have in real life, and try to say, okay, this is my requirement. How can I implement that in a flow? And really, it's going to be with experience that you're going to be more and more comfortable with this. That's how I learned it. I'm pretty sure that's, Olivier, how you learn it. You have to practice and really keep up to date with the latest release, the latest change on Flow, because once again, there are a bunch of enhancements that are done. And one day you're going to notice, oh, there's a new button, or I need to do something differently. And you just have, to practice and read on the new feature to be able to cope with that.
And then also maybe I'll start small. Like whenever you want to tackle the first flow, your first use case, you want to try to automate or improve with flows, start by little parts. I want to get the data of this records, and then I want to display it to my users. You start small with the get record, and then from there you can say, okay, I want to display it, and then I want to allow them to add contacts. So how do I do this? I now can get the account and display it. How do I not then create the contact related to it? Smaller increment will work way better at first than trying to do the full-on big flow right away in one go. That's another.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. So another thing which is coming in my mind is that when you're building so many flows and the Salesforce instance is already complicated, what would you say if there are 10 flows you have to create? Would you guys like go through best practices to maybe compress those 10 flows into one? Like there, so for example, an account object would have 10 changes on it. So would you advise create 10 flows on it, or you would, show us how we can just compress all those different 10 changes on one flow? I hope I'm explaining it better.
No, that you're explaining it completely fine, and that's the big question. Like that's the really topic on which architects are fighting over right now, because it's like, okay, before the best practice, and we're going to cover that in more detail in the final session that we have when we're going to talk about best practices. There is no one magic answer to that. It depends on the context. It depends on what is the automation that you're doing in each of your flow. Ideally, as much as possible, we try to limit the amount of different flows that we have. In some cases, we cannot avoid having multiple flows, and in some cases it doesn't make sense to merge everything into one flow, because then your flow is going to be a monster and it's going to be like terrible to maintain. So it's a question of like judgment, and it depends on the context. As much as possible, try to limit the number of flows, but I think the magic answer of saying like you need to have one flow to rule them all, it's not working anymore, and we're seeing a change in on that from Salesforce and from the architect community as well.
One thing
Thank you
also
so-
that
yeah, thank you
that
so
can help is that if you have multiple flow, have a naming convention to your flow.
And actually next week also you'll see, to address that, Salesforce has released something. We'll talk about Flow Trigger Explorer. This is a good way to see, okay, what are all the automations that are being set up on my specific object, how they are being triggered, what's the order of execution. So Salesforce understands that challenge and is providing tool to be able to address that challenge and provide more control over your automation. So that's something that we'll see also next week.
Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to the last session and the coming sessions as well. Thanks a lot.
All right. Thank you so much, William and Oliver, for this amazing session. We had 130 participants attend, and this has been really great. Thank you for answering all the questions. Before we wrap up, we just have a couple of announcements. So as you all know, this is a series of 4 sessions. We had a great first session today. Looking forward to session 2, 3, and 4. So if you have not RSVP'd yet, please go ahead and RSVP for these sessions. The next session is next week on record triggered flows on June 22nd, the same time as today, followed by screen flows and flow advanced concepts in the coming weeks. So please don't forget to RSVP for these. All right, moving on, we just have a surprise for all the participants here. So we are going to have a lucky draw right after this. For anyone who participated in this will be part of the lucky draw, and we're giving away 2 certification vouchers. So we will announce that shortly after the event is closed. So we are able to confirm who attended, and we will announce it in our chatter group shortly after that. All right, so once we announce the winners, we request you to share your email addresses with us. So stay in tune in chatter group, and we will reach out to you as well separately. So send us your email address and we will be able to send you the certification voucher after that. But otherwise, thank you all so much for joining us on a Wednesday. And William and Olivier, thank you again for hosting this great session for us and the Toronto community. And thank you all for joining. Looking forward to seeing you all next week. You all have a wonderful week. Take care.
Thank you.
William, thank you, Olivia. Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Have a nice day.